Hey friends, in this video I'm going to be covering my top 10 best casual commanders printed in this year, 2023. There were a whopping 398 brand new commanders printed this year, and I evaluated all of them under 3 criteria. The first is the commander's power floor. This is putting the commander in an unoptimized list. So for example, if you go to EDHREC and you do a sample deck list of the chosen commander, something like that, where it's a lot of cool ideas, but there's a lot of fat that needs to be trimmed and it's not tuned. The second criteria is the power ceiling. This is the commander leading an optimized list. So not quite CDH, but definitely high powered, where all the best card choices are being made, and there's a minimal amount of cute cards that are just kind of like fluff. And then the final criteria is consistency. How consistent the commander is at pulling off its goals. And this will also include your opponent's interaction. So in a highly interactive game, how often can the commander fight through interaction and still pull off what it's trying to do? I'm going to be ranking all these criteria from S, which is the very highest, to D, which is the very lowest. And also a reminder that this is not a CDH scale. If this was CDH, it would be an entirely different list. I'm focusing on casual commander. Alright, we kick things off with number 10 with the War Doctor. This is a 4-mana Boros 3/5 legendary creature Time Lord Doctor, and it says whenever one or more other permanents phase out, and whenever one or more other cards are put into exile from anywhere, put a time counter on the War Doctor. And whenever the War Doctor attacks, it deals damage equal to the number of time counters on it onto any target. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So at first glance, the War Doctor looks like a sweet incremental removal engine for your phasing out and exiling style of deck. You're going to slowly accumulate some time counters onto the War Doctor, and you're going to be picking off small creatures, and then as you get more and more time counters onto it, you can take out bigger and bigger creatures and eventually start doming people into the face, right? Well, in reality, the War Doctor is far more scary than that. There are a bunch of cards able to be run with the War Doctor that can put a crazy amount of time counters onto the War Doctor and basically mean that the first time the War Doctor attacks, he's going to be doming somebody in the face for lethal damage. And the wording on cards we're looking for is exiling cards until we hit a specific criteria. For example, the Day of the Doctor says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary card. Every single card you see as you're exiling until you hit a legendary card means another time counter put on the War Doctor. So for example, if you exile 5 cards until you hit a legendary card, that's 5 time counters put on the War Doctor, and that's 5 damage the War Doctor is going to be dealing the next time you're going to be attacking with him. But what if we don't have any legendary cards in our 99? Well, then we get to reveal our entire library, put that many time counters on the War Doctor, and then just start one-shotting our opponents. Similarly, we can put a ton of time counters by just activating the Wand of Wonder to target all of our opponents and make them exile cards until they reveal instant or sorcery, or we can use Cascade, like the TARDIS, to cascade, say, a 1-drop, and if we have zero drops in our deck, we get to reveal our entire library, put that many time counters on the War Doctor, and one-shot our opponents. It's very easy to just put the War Doctor from 0 time counters on it to a lethal amount, swing, and boom, somebody's dead. Things get only more ridiculous if we can start taking out multiple opponents on the same turn with the War Doctor. Roaming Throne doubles the attack trigger, so that means 2 dead opponents if we have a lethal amount of time counters on the War Doctor. Seize the Day means 1 or 2 additional combat phases, which means 1 or 2 additional dead opponents with Seize the Day and the War Doctor. And we have also ways of protecting the War Doctor from everything with Vexilus Praetor, also giving him basically evasion to get around any pesky blockers as well. The War Doctor is also a doctor, which means he can have a doctor's companion in the command zone with him. The most popular one is Ryan Sinclair, because he has the correct wording to add additional time counters onto the War Doctor. Exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. K9 gives you access to blue, Ward 1, which is nice, and also can give the War Doctor unblockable. And I also really like Clara Oswald. It's not that popular because I guess she's 6 mana, but it gives you access to any color you want. I really like green or black, and she also doubles the attack triggers and other triggers of the War Doctor, which means 2 dead opponents if you have a lethal amount of time counters on him. So the power floor of the War Doctor is relatively high. If you're just going to be exiling one card from the top of your library or whatever and putting one time counter on the War Doctor at a time, then yeah, it's not super scary, but if you're putting like 3 or 4 at a time, just pretty easily with cascading or whatever, then the War Doctor starts becoming a serious threat, a repeatable removal engine every single time you're attacking, and eventually being able to dome your opponents. So all that said, I would say the power floor of the War Doctor is still relatively high. I'd give it a B. Now, as far as the power ceiling, well, if you're running the right cards with the War Doctor, the War Doctor just becomes instantly lethal by casting a single spell. So that's very, very good. Though keep in mind, the War Doctor can only be killing basically one person per combat unless you have ways of doubling it, and there is a bit of setup. So I will give the War Doctor's power ceiling an A. But the big strike against the War Doctor, I would say, is consistency. The main issue with the War Doctor is that it's going to automatically be the archenemy at the table. Once your opponents understand how easy it is for the War Doctor to kill people out of nowhere, they're not going to let the War Doctor just sit around the table. And the War Doctor has no built-in resiliency, which means for a 4-drop, if your opponents are going to be focus firing the War Doctor with everything they've got, that means the War Doctor is going to die a lot and probably not accomplish his goals of one-shotting opponents that easily. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be an uphill battle. So with all that said, I would say the consistency is still a B. You can still just cast a spell and then attack with the War Doctor and one-shot somebody. That's very possible, but it's going to be difficult to close out games, and the more interaction your opponents have, the harder it is for you to pull this off. So overall ranking is going to be 10th spot. Moving on to number 9, we've got Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir. This is a 4-mana Esper 4/3 legendary creature human knight, and it has Eminence. Whenever you attack with one or more knights, if Sidar Jabari is in the command zone or on the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. So this already tells us everything we need to know about Sidar. We're going to be focusing on knights, we're going to be focusing on attacking with those knights, and it doesn't matter if Sidar is on the battlefield or in the command zone, we're always going to be getting a free loot effect from the start of the game. You do have to attack with knights, but it's not totally free, but it's going to be happening very often. Then it also has Flying for Strike, and whenever Sidar Jabari deals combat damage to a player, return target knight creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Sidar gives your knight deck free looting effects from the command zone, so you don't even need to cast it, and when you do cast it, things get even better, because every single time Sidar is dealing combat damage, you're going to be getting a knight card from the graveyard to the battlefield, and that could include the ones that you were looting away with its Eminence ability. So the 99 of the deck is going to be, surprise, surprise, Knights. Knights aren't exactly the strongest archetype out there. There's definitely more powerful creature types out there. This is probably not even in the top 10, but there are some very good ones. The best one being Hakan Stromgald Scourge. You can discard it to Sidar's Eminence ability, and then you can just start casting all your knight cards from your graveyard. It's wild. Knight Exemplar gives all your knights +1/+1 and indestructible. Herald of Hoofbeats gives your entire board Horsemanship, which is like super flying. It's really, really good. And then you get to close out the games with stuff like Vodalian Wave Knight to grow all of your knights even faster with Sidar's looting ability. Knight's Charge, which is a mass drain effect, and then if you have a nice full graveyard, then you can mass reanimate all of them. And one of the best new cards, Moonshaker Cavalry, is a knight, and it's also the white Craterhoof Behemoth, just fantastic finisher for the knight deck. Now these cards are sweet, but the downside here though is that knights overall are just not as strong as the very best creature types in Magic. So how do I rank Sidar? It's an interesting one. I would say the power floor of the deck is relatively high. Sidar is an incredibly powerful commander, however, he does force you to be in knights. And knights, as I said earlier, while they have some very exceptionally very powerful creatures in them, not all of them are very, very good. And so I would say it's about a B. You're forced into knights, but you have an excellent commander to really prop up the creature type. And we have the same issue going with the power ceiling of the commander. You're still focused on knights. However, if you do optimize a list, you cut basically all but the very best knight cards and you replace them with tutor effects, either Entombs or Vampiric Tutors, to make sure that you only get the best knights to play with, and Sidar only reanimates the best of the best. Now, for consistency, this is where Sidar really shines. Eminence means you don't even need to cast this commander to get value out of it. Constantly looting means you're going to always smooth out your draws. If you need to hit lands, you'll find your lands easier. If you have like some bad knights, you get to discard them for some better knights. You'll always have reanimation targets for all your reanimation stuff. That's all well and good. And then casting Sidar is obviously even better. He doesn't have any built-in removal or anything, but because he has Eminence, he's just super consistent, so I'm going to give him an A in consistency. So overall, Sidar is one of the best commanders printed this year, I think, and easily rank 9 in my opinion. Moving to number 8, though, is a dark horse candidate maybe for this, Smeagol, Helpful Guide. He's not very popular on EDH Rec, but I think this one is slept on. This is a 3-mana Golgari 4/2 legendary creature halfling horror. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, the ring tempts you, and whenever the ring tempts you, target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest into their graveyard. So Smeagol basically rewards you for being tempted by the ring by just stealing your opponent's lands. It mills your opponents and steals their lands, and you could do that a lot in a single turn cycle with the help of Nazgul. Nazgul are one of the most efficient ways of being tempted by the ring. You can run 9 of them in your deck. 3 mana, ETB, the ring tempts you, and then they're a body that if you sacrifice, you get tempted by the ring one more time with Smeagol's end of turn triggered ability. So Nazgul are the heart of this deck in my opinion. Also anything else that kind of deals with aristocrats and a ring tempting like Golem or Rise of the Witch King, which can let you sacrifice a Nazgul, return a Nazgul onto the battlefield, and make your opponent sacrifice stuff at the same time too. So when this deck is firing on all cylinders, you're going to be tempted by the ring multiple times per turn cycle. You're going to be stealing so many lands from your opponents and milling them at the same time. So think aristocrats and ring tempts you put together with some landfall synergies as well, because they're going to be ramping so much. To close out the game, you have a numerous ways of doing so. You can go with just your typical landfall synergies or aristocrat payoffs, but there's also some combos that are unique to Smeagol as well, such as Smeagol, Dunedain Rangers, Bloodghast, and Viscera Seer to just mill out all of your opponents and steal their lands in the process. But no matter how you slice it, Smeagol is going to be amazing value for you. So Smeagol is a very interesting one. I think if you look at the power floor of this deck, if you're not focusing on Nazgul or the ring tempts you, then it's pretty fair. Like every single turn, if you're doing just aristocrat stuff, for example, you're going to be milling your opponents and stealing a land each turn, which is already very, very good for 3 mana, but nothing too seriously crazy. So I would say the power floor of this deck is about a B. And also, none of this is guaranteed either. You do have to sacrifice a creature if you want to be tempted by the ring with Smeagol, or you have to be running, ring tempt 2 cards to generate value off Smeagol as well. Now, if you fully optimize Smeagol, then I think the power ceiling is very high. Like I said, if you focus on Nazgul and aristocrats and landfall synergies and maybe throw in some of those powerful combos as well, the power ceiling could be incredibly high, easily an A in my opinion. And also, I think the consistency is also very high here too, and I'm going to give it an A. Because Smeagol is going to be ramping crazy amounts of lands off your opponents. And that means if your opponents are hating out Smeagol, well, you're already using Smeagol to ramp, and that's going to pay for the commander tax to recast Smeagol. And not only that, if you're just ramping a whole ton, it makes it easier to cast the other spells in your hand and do your thing much more easier and consistently. The big downside with Smeagol, though, is that once your opponents are eliminated, they take those lands that you stole off them as well. So Smeagol actually gets weaker as more and more opponents are eliminated, and that's why you really want to combo kill all your opponents at once or swing for lethal all at once and not take them out one at a time. Overall, though, I think Smeagol is severely underrated in Commander right now, and he is an easy 7th spot for me. Moving on is a brand new commander, Pantlaza Sunfavored. This is a 5-mana Naya dinosaur commander. It's a 4/4, and whenever Pantlaza or another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may discover X, where X is that creature's toughness. Do this only once each turn. And Discover is like a souped up version of Cascade. It says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with that mana value or less, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And the reason why Discover is even better than Cascade here is that you don't have to cast the spell. So if you hit like a counter spell or a board wipe or whatever, and you don't really want to cast it this time, you can just put it in your hand. It's all good. So Pantlaza is just going to be great with dinosaurs. There's a lot of really good dinosaurs. Despite them having a relatively small card pool and relatively little card support, the card quality here is just very, very good. Obviously, small costed dinosaurs that like ramp you and have high toughness like Wayward Swordtooth or Topiary Stomper are going to be excellent, but also stuff like Galta Stampede Tyrant is going to be a blast too as well. But Pantlaza gets even more interesting because you can throw in a sub-theme of blinking, and that's how you kind of optimize the list. If you run stuff like Ephemerate, you can get around Pantlaza's once per turn ability to discover multiple times per turn very, very efficiently. Same thing with like Semester's End, which can also protect all your stuff from removal, or Teleportation Circle, which is a mana-free way of just, you know, blinking Pantlaza or whatever creature you have and discovering every single turn. And these double as protection from removal too. So if you're afraid of targeted removal or even certain types of board wipes, these blink abilities protect Pantlaza and your other creatures and your board while also generating a ton of extra value for you. So Pantlaza is very impressive. I would say the power floor of this one is actually quite high. Like, even looking at the stock precon, I was very impressed seeing it in action. Dinosaurs, while they do have a small card pool, are generally speaking pretty good, and just simply like playing a bunch of dinosaurs with Pantlaza and just discovering for free every single turn is insane amounts of mana advantage and card advantage. So I would say the floor here is actually quite high. It's kind of hard to screw up a Pantlaza deck in my opinion, so I would give it an A actually. Now the power ceiling is a different story. Like I said, dinosaurs have a small card pool, and while they're very, very good and you can get even more mileage out of it by optimizing the list by running only the best dinosaurs and adding like a blink package to it, or maybe a combo package with Food Chain, there's a certain limit to it. And I think the most optimized versions are going to be focusing mostly on Pantlaza and less on the dinosaurs themselves. I would say the power ceiling is a little bit lower when we're talking casual, and I would give it a power ceiling of a B. But the consistency is also very impressive. Just casting Pantlaza means you're going to discover 4 just off its own ability. So even if Pantlaza gets removed, you've still gotten some value out of it. And just existing and casting dinosaurs means that Pantlaza is going to just very passively generate value for you, and it only gets better when you have blink effects. And the fact that you are encouraged to go blink makes Pantlaza a little bit more resilient to targeted removal, because once you add a blink package, that means you can use your blinks in response to targeted removal or even board wipes to make Pantlaza a little bit more resilient to interaction, which is quite nice. Now it is 5 mana, so if it does get shut down a few times, it's going to be difficult to recast. You are in green, so that helps a little bit, but overall I would say the consistency is pretty high, and I'd give it an A. Alright, moving on to number 5 is another landfall commander. This is Thalia and the Gitrog Monster. This is a 4-mana Abzan commander. It's a 4/4 legendary creature, human frog horror. It has first strike, death touch. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever Thalia and the Gitrog Monster attack, sacrifice a creature or land, then draw a card. So landfall decks are a dime a dozen these days, and Thalia is no different. You're going to be doing stuff like sacrificing lands and replaying them with Ramunap Excavator, making elementals out of the lands you're sacrificing with Titania, and drawing cards off the Gitrog Monster. These are things we've seen before and things we continue to see, and then we do stuff like landfall triggers, such as Scoot Swarm to make an army of Scoots, Lotus Cobra to make more mana, Avenger of Zendikar to make a super huge army. But the thing that really makes Thalia and the Gitrog Monster stand out is the fact that you're also going to be hosing your opponents, hating at your opponents passively with the Thalia and the Gitrog Monster on the battlefield. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped doesn't read like something very exciting for you, but trust me, on the receiving end, it really sucks, and it slows down all your opponent's game plans. And this could put your opponents back 1, maybe even 2 turns over the course of a game, and that's really important in terms of tempo plays. So not only is Thalia and the Gitrog Monster doing everything you want a landfall deck to be doing, it also gives you access to 3 colors of mana. So Gitrog Monster, for example, more of a combo deck, higher power and all that, but it doesn't have access to white. So having access to 3 colors of landfall stuff, synergies, is also very powerful in and of itself. Next is a big one. It's Etali Primal Conqueror. This is a 7 mana red Elder Dinosaur that has a Gruul identity. It's a 7/7 legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur. It has Trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among the non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. And you can spend 10 mana, 9 in a Phyrexian green, to transform Etali, activate only as a sorcery. And the backside is Etali Primal Sickness. It has Trample, Indestructible, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get that many poison counters. And it's an 11/11, so that means if your opponents don't have blockers, they're just gonna die. So Etali has been making a splash in the 99 of many decks where it's more popular, but as a commander, the game plan is very simple. All we're going to be doing is we're going to be running so much ramp in order to cast Etali as quickly as possible. Cards like Somberwalt Sage are going to be some of the best because it's like a 3-drop that taps for 3 mana for Etali. Delighted Halfling is also going to be fantastic because it makes sure Etali can't be countered, which is the main weakness of the deck. And also Jeska's Will or any big rituals that can cheat out Etali a lot faster is more than worth it here, even if you're just casting for a ritual effect, because Etali generates so much card advantage. And then when Etali is on the battlefield, we want to maximize its triggered ability, which is the main reason why we run it. Roaming Throne to double its ETB trigger, and cards like Jaxis, the Troublemaker, and Delina to make clones of Etali. Yes, they're going to die because of the legend rule, but you just care about that sweet, sweet ETB trigger, baby. Getting basically 4 cards off all your opponents guaranteed every single time it enters the battlefield is bananas and is going to overwhelm opponents very, very quickly. Now, because Etali's game plan is so simple, all you have to do is basically ramp out Etali and reap the benefits. I'm going to give the power ceiling of this one an S. I've never seen a bad Etali. Like, you could have a situation where you just hit cards that don't really matter to you, like a counterspell and like maybe like a Farseek or whatever. But each time, in my personal experience, every single time an Etali is cast, either the person who cast it is winning the game or has won the game off it. So it's really hard to screw up an Etali deck. Like, all you have to do is add a lot of ramp cards and you've basically done it. Now, once you properly build around Etali with blink effects and copy effects, then it gets even more powerful, and the power ceiling, I would actually say, is an A. And I'm saying it's an A because while it's very, very good, it doesn't outright win you the game, and you could whiff a bit. So I would say it's not quite an S or anything, it's not like an auto win, but it is still very powerful. And then we come to consistency, where I'm actually going to rank it a B. And the problem with Etali, at least in the command zone, is that you don't have access to the best blink colors. Like, yes, you do have the examples I gave you to copy Etali or double its triggered ability. However, if we had access to white or blue, then we'd have way better blink options, and then Etali really pops off. So Etali looks really, really good if we find the few cards that, you know, copy Etali or double its triggers or whatever, but there's not that many of them, so the deck actually does suffer consistency issues. And like I said, you are going to be getting 4 cards guaranteed off Etali, 1 for each person at the table, but sometimes you do just get bad cards that don't really win you the game. So yeah, I would say consistency-wise, it does suffer a little bit of consistency issues, even though overall, it's one of the best commanders printed this year, in my opinion. Moving on to number 4, we have the most all-or-nothing commander on the entire list. This is Rohan, Scion of War. This is a 3-mana Rakdos 4/2 legendary creature human wizard with menace, and you can tap it to have spells you cast this turn that are black and or red cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So if you lost like 10 life this turn, then your red and black spells cost 10 less to cast this turn, as long as you tap down Rohan, which is really, really good. It's a huge mana discount. So what are we doing with Rohan? It's very simple. We're going to first find ways to very efficiently lose as much life as we want. The best one probably is Treasonous Ogre, where we can pay 3 life to make 1 red mana. So, you know, if we're at 40 or whatever, we can just pay 30 life, make 10 mana. That's pretty nice. And then cards like Blood Celebrants are just ways to efficiently lower our life total to whatever we want. Or Necropotence, draw as many cards as we want while lowering our life total on a single turn. And then when we've lost as much life as we want, then we have a huge mana discount with Rowan, and we cast a big X spell to win the game, like Crackle of Power, Torment of Hailfire, or Exsanguinate. That's all you need to do with Rowan to win the game, is just lose a bunch of life, and then tap Rowan, and then cast a giant X spell, and GG, game is over. The only other cards you really care about is protection for Rowan, because Rowan all just needs to tap down, lose a bunch of life, cast an X spell, and that's GG. So opponents are going to be focusing on trying to kill her. So we have cards like Lightning Greaves, Deflecting Swat, and Not Dead After All to make it a little bit harder for opponents to kill her, though these are not surefire things. So the power floor of Rowan is kind of mid, honestly. Like, if you don't have the proper life loss cards in your hand, then Rowan just doesn't really do anything. So the worst case scenario with Rowan is she taps for nothing, and then you're sad. But then obviously the best case is you have a life loss card, and you activate it, and you're very happy, and you just kind of win the game. Even an optimized list kind of understands how to build Rowan properly, I would say, but you just might not have like the tutors or the right cards to make sure you have the life loss cards in your hand in order to pull off the game winning combo. Or if you're just like focusing on cards that make you like lose 2 life per turn or 3 life per turn, then Rowan is good but not super great or anything. But obviously, if you optimize Rowan, then the power ceiling, I would say, is just an S. Like, if you focus on the best tutors, the best accelerants, haste enablers for Rowan, the best life loss cards, and the best finishers, and run all the tutors possible to find them at the given time, then Rowan is very good. You just have to activate her a single time, and you win the game. You take out all your opponents all at once. What better way to end the game is there, really, in Commander? But I'm going to dock Rowan on consistency, where I'm giving her a B. Because Rowan is very clearly the archenemy at the table. Your opponents are going to quickly understand that if Rowan is allowed to tap and do her thing, then you're going to lose that very turn. So every source of interaction is going to be going at Rowan. And while Rowan does have options to protect her from interaction, it is harder, and she doesn't have any built-in removal, and she does require a good deal of setup. You need a card that makes you lose basically most of your life total, you need a finisher in your hand, and you're probably going to need also a haste enabler for Rowan, all 3 of them in your hand before you get to win the game with Rowan. So there is a good deal of setup here, and that plus your opponent trying to interact with you is going to be kind of difficult. And if Rowan doesn't get to do her thing, then you just don't get to do anything that game. But if you do get to do the thing, you just immediately win. So that's a consistency issue here. That's why I'm going to give her a B. And now we move to the top 3 with Narset Enlightened Exile. This is a 4-mana Jeskai 3/4 legendary creature, human monk, and it says creatures you control have prowess. And whenever Narset attacks, exile target non-creature non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. So Narset does 2 things for you. She pumps up your team for a go wide strategy with prowess, which is very powerful, and whenever she's attacking, you get to cast a spell for free essentially every single time, as long as you have something in your graveyard worth exiling and copying with Narset. So she's card advantage, she's mana advantage, and she's a finisher all rolled into one. So what we're doing with Narset is we're going to be running the most efficient token generators available to us, stuff like Monastery Mentor, Kaikar, and Third Path Iconoclast, to just basically make a bunch of tokens while we're doing our thing. And then Narset pumps them up into lethal armies. And then the next step is we're going to be casting non-creature spells. Jeskai Ascendancy basically allows us to loot, double pump all our creatures, untap our stuff, it's all good stuff. Seize the Truth allows us to draw 3 cards off Narset. And then if we're getting very sweaty, all the extra combat abilities make it very trivial for us to basically just have a couple tokens on the battlefield plus Narset, swing, take an extra combat, pump everything, attack again, swing, pump everything, maybe to have another extra combat spell in there, and then winning the game is a trivial matter with Narset. So the power floor with Narset is pretty high, but it can be done poorly. I've seen unoptimized lists that don't run the best token generators or don't run the best payoff cards, and so if played fairly, it's not like super oppressive or anything. However, if properly built around and you're running the extra combat spells, then Narset is a complete menace. It's so easy to just have a couple creatures on the battlefield with Narset, attack, and then just chain together a bunch of extra combat steps or just like pump abilities and just crush the entire table in one single attack out of nowhere. And that's why I'm going to give her power ceiling an S. The only problem here is consistency, and this is a B grade, just like I gave Rowan, because the weaknesses are all the same. Once your opponents understand how powerful Narset is, they're going to be throwing all sorts of removal at her, and she has no built-in resiliency to interaction. Granted, you are in better colors to protect her. White and blue are very good at protecting creatures. However, those are extra cards that you have to keep in mind. And also, you do have to have the right combination of cards. You need to have token generators, but then you also need to have prowess payoff cards, and then you need to have your finishers all together. So if you draw all your tokens, but you don't get the non-creature spells, you're going to feel very sad. And if you can't find your finisher, you're going to feel very sad. So you need to have the right amount at any given time. So all of this considered, that means there's going to be consistency issues, and that's why I'm just going to give it a B grade instead of something higher. Nonetheless, I think Narset is one of the scariest commanders printed this year, and is a solid 3rd place on my ranking. Moving on to number 2 on the list is Sauron the Dark Lord. This is a 6-mana Grixis 7/6 legendary creature avatar horror, and it has Ward. So if you target it with a spell or ability, you also have to sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature, or that ability or spell is countered. And then whenever an opponent casts a spell, you amass Orcs 1, and whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you, and whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 4 cards. Oh my goodness, there are so many abilities on good old Sauron. So Sauron comes with incredible ward ability. Sacrificing legendary artifacts or legendary creatures is not a cheap ability for your opponents, so that means targeted removal is going to be very painful for them. Whenever an opponent casts any spell, you basically have a Taurian Mauler that grows and even replaces itself. Like if it dies, you just make a new Taurian Mauler. That's fantastic. When it deals combat damage to a player, you get to be tempted by the ring, so you get this loot ability and also deal more damage to all your opponents passively. And then whenever you're tempted, you get to do a mini wheel for just yourself. You get to discard your hands, and then you get to draw 4 cards, so it's just card advantage. So Sauron literally just does everything for you. You don't even need to play anything else, and you can actually just win games off just having Sauron on the battlefield. So what are we going to be doing with Sauron? Well, I've seen the most popular way of doing Sauron is actually focusing on the armies, pumping them up and all that, but my personal favorite way, and I think the way that is actually more optimal, is actually focusing on graveyard strategies. So the first couple turns, what we'd be doing is running cards like File of Galadriel, like just ramp cards, which is exceptionally good with Sauron though, because if we have no cards in hand, when we discard our hand and then draw 4 cards, we're going to draw an additional card thanks to the file. Our top end stuff that we're going to be recurring later, reanimating later, are like cycling cards like Rampaging War Mammoth that are going to cycle to destroy artifacts, or Balrog of Moria, which ramps us, and we can ramp out Sauron a little bit faster by cycling it away. And then once we do have a nice full graveyard and we're activating Sauron's ability, we can mass reanimate with Breach the Multiverse. We can discard away cards like Wonder to give all our stuff flying, or we can discard like Daring Fiendbonder to give Sauron indestructible. So not only does it have insane ward, but also it's impervious to most board wipes, which is just super fun. So for all these reasons, I think Sauron has one of the highest power ceilings we've ever seen in Commander. Literally, if you just run lands and Sauron, I think you might be able to steal some games at like lower power tables, because Sauron just literally does everything. He is the game-ending threat, the ever-increasing orc army. He is very hard to deal with. He draws you more cards. He loots for you. He's more draining. Like, he's just so good. He does everything. So power floor is an easy S for me. Now the power ceiling is also very high. I'm going to give it an A because he doesn't just like outright win you the game the turn he's cast or anything, but He has this enormous clock on you, and when you actually optimize around him with the reanimation, the fact that you get to refill your hand so efficiently, I can see optimized builds focusing on just the best fast mana, cheap mana available to just empty out your hand as quickly as possible, fill your graveyard as quickly as possible, get Sauron on the battlefield, be tempted by the ring, and just start drawing 4 cards very efficiently. And then for consistency, this is an interesting one. I'm giving it an A, though I could be argued down to a B. The way I see Sauron is that he's so consistent in terms of he doesn't really need other cards to make him super great. Like, you just put him on the battlefield, you ramp him out, and then it's a nightmare for your opponents to deal with him. So you don't really need that much setup or anything, or specific cards in your hand to make Sauron great, and that's why I consider him very, very consistent. The only downside is twofold. First of all, you are not in green, so you cannot land ramp out Sauron. You're going to have to work harder to ramp him out. He is a 6-drop, and he's not like immune to board wipes or anything, so you can get rid of him, even though target removal is very difficult. So things like artifact removal, mass artifact board wipes are going to be very painful for Sauron, because a lot of your ramp cards are going to be artifacts, and it's going to make it much harder for you to cast or recast Sauron. And the other thing that Sauron is a little bit weak against is Graveyard Hate. Obviously, you're going to be filling your graveyard so efficiently with the ring tempts you and all that stuff, you really want to use the graveyard as a resource, and if somebody denies you your graveyard, it's going to make it a little bit worse. However, that's not super big of an issue, because you're also making a huge, ever-growing army that is very hard to deal with too, so you could just win by just smashing with your army. That's fine too. So I think the main weakness is actually just the fact that, like, you're not in green, so having a 6-drop and not being in green kind of sucks. So I'm going to give it an A and not like an S or anything, but yeah, I think overall though, this is an easy number 2 for me, and just a really fun commander. I love him so much. Alright, before we reveal my number 1 pick, I'm going to go through some honorable mentions. These are ones that just did not make the cut to the top 10, but they're just under it. Cards like Rocco Street Chef is very underrated. It kind of goes under the radar, but it makes a ton of food tokens, which are artifacts, really good, and grows your army. Carmen gets huge out of nowhere and can start one-shotting opponents while recurring things. Ob Nixilis generates a ton of card advantage and also one-shots with Flample. Aragorn the Uniter is a great multicolor matters value engine that works great for Voltron and humans. Bernard is a great new aristocrats in Bant that gives a lot of food love. Gorgor and Satoru, I've always seen this commander do serious work and flood the table with 5/5 flyers and just put a huge clock on people. Shalai Halar is a great new +1/+1 counter commander that has a lot of combo potential. And Eliveri is another enchantress aura commander that's incredibly powerful, very efficient, draws his cards, and also just fills a lot of auras onto the battlefield just by herself. So all of these are incredibly powerful, but for one reason or another, I just thought they didn't make the top 10. Now, for the number 1 pick, it is Atraxa Grand Unifier. This is a very expensive commander. It's 7 mana, it's green, white, blue, and black, so everything that isn't red, 4 colors. It's a 7/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Angel. It has flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So to me, Atraxa is very similar to Etali, but doesn't have the same weaknesses as Etali has, and that's why I put it in the top spot. Like Etali, we're just going to be focusing on primarily building around Atraxa, putting a lot of ramp cards, doubling her triggered ability or enter the battlefield trigger. Those are all just fantastic with Atraxa, because once Atraxa is on the battlefield, we get to refill our entire hand with her ETB trigger, and then she's just a flying vigilance, death touch, lifelink that can 3-shot any opponent in the air with commander damage, is almost impossible to attack into profitably, and also gains you a bunch of life in the process. It's very hard for Atraxa to be dealt with through combat. And then if she's removed, well, that's kind of a good thing, because if all of our cards are basically ramp, then we just recast her and refill our hand. So sometimes it's even good for our opponents to kill her. And then to further optimize our game plan, I think the best way is actually going for a blink strategy. Once she's on the battlefield, stuff like Displacer Kitten and other sort of blink cards can blink Atraxa very efficiently and refill our hand, or just blink our other creatures with powerful ETBs like Agent of Treachery and Eternal Witness. And unlike Etali, which I said the major criticism was he wasn't in blue or white, Atraxa is in both. So we have all the best blink cards to really utilize Atraxa's ETB trigger. So all that said, I think Atraxa is an easy S for the power ceiling. I've never seen a bad Atraxa deck. I've never seen it. All you have to do is run ramp cards. They don't have to be the best ramp cards. They just have to be ramp cards. You ramp out Atraxa, you refill your hand. She dies, you do it again. And if she's not dead, then you just attack in the air, 3-shot your opponents while gaining life in the process. It's a very simple commander, very easy to pilot and everything, and it's very hard to build it poorly. Like, I've literally never seen it. So this is an easy S for the power floor. As for the power ceiling, I'm going to give it an A. Like I said, S is usually just for commanders that can just like win the game immediately, and Atraxa doesn't win the game immediately, but it's kind of like an overwhelming value thing. So it's going to give you an A. Just casting her a couple times, or just being able to cast her a single time, honestly, is usually enough to swing games in the favor of you. And then for consistency, I'm going to give her an S. Like I said, with Sauron, I gave him an A because you didn't have access to green, so your ramp options are a little bit more risky, I would say. Whereas Atraxa, we're in green, so we have literally all the best ramp options available to us to get a 7-drop onto the battlefield super consistently. We don't have to rely on like artifacts or anything that can get blown up easily, and her value really comes for ETB trigger. So even if she dies or anything, recasting her is sometimes a good thing. And then if she's on the battlefield, well, she can win games all by herself. So she does literally everything for you, and she's very hard for your opponents to actually put her down. You really have to remove her and then have all your opponents like agree to just like combat damage her down while she's not on the battlefield. That's like the only way to really beat her. The only thing Atraxa is vulnerable to, really, and all commanders are vulnerable to mostly on this ranking guide, is counter magic. Like if you counter spell her a bunch of times, then yeah, you could probably win pretty easily. But outside of that, like, you can't just have a fair game against Atraxa and hope to win her. You have to really team up against her and go full arch enemy mode against her. So yeah, she's an S. She's super consistent. Her power floor is an S, and her power ceiling is an A. So I will say this is my #1 pick for best commander for casual commander in 2023. All right, friends, we got there. We covered all 10 of them, including honorable mentions. Again, this is my only personal opinion based on my personal rankings. This is not a CDH guide, it's a casual guide, and obviously your opinions are going to be different. So let me know in the comment section what your top 10 commanders would be for casual commander. And if you are a CDH player and you're knowledgeable about CDH, let me know which are the most exciting and most powerful CDH commanders that came out this year as well too. Like and subscribe if you like this sort of content. Until next time, friends. See ya!